My name is John Mollison. I interview old guys. I draw their airplanes. And I'm part of the Old Guys in Their Airplanes media production company. And I have to tell you that you're seeing one thing, but if you would see what I see right now, I'm seeing a whole room of people that have turned out to honor one of America's greats, Brigadier General Jim McDivitt. I want to tell you about some things just so you know what to expect. The first thing is that I'm really not going to be doing the interview because, well, I'll give you a backstory. I got to interview old guys and draw their airplanes when I was a little boy. They were, World War II fighter pilots were my heroes. I always wondered why people could have baseball heroes or football heroes or even media celebrities as their heroes, when mine were like Joe Foss and Francis Gabreski and Dick Bong, who did great things and mastered complicated machines and then went on to serve our country. So today, we're going to be interviewing Brigadier General Jim McDivitt, not only a fighter pilot from the Korean War, but also a representative of the greatest scientific achievement of the 20th century, space travel. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be handing the microphone off to a man from a group called the Friday Pilots. Now, some people have all gotten together to produce this event that we've got here. For example, the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, the organization that represents the DFC medal. Military Tales, they're the YouTube channel that you're watching. Hacienda Del Sol, the fabulous place where that's allowing us to have this great event here. And also my company, Old Guys in Their Airplanes. But one of the Friday Pilots and I found out this summer that we both shared the same experience, and that is we both learned that we stood on the shoulders of giants at an early age, and we both looked up. Well, Alex Wright is one of the Friday Pilots here in Tucson, South Dakota. And, you know, I'll tell you this. You think you can get this stuff done live, but it's live. I'm from South Dakota. And I'll tell you, the weather here is a little bit nicer. You can hear the crowd. But Alex Wright shares the same love and passion for the generations that come before us. And so I'd like to hand off the microphone, Alex. You know, I've gotten to interview hundreds of my heroes. It's really cool that you get to interview one of yours.
Thanks, John. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. The opportunity to do this is what I consider a once-in-a-lifetime event for me. So why don't you go away and I'll interview Jim.
Gladly.
Jim, thanks so much for being here this evening. It is truly a treat.
I heard there was free beer.
There is. I'm buying. It's truly a treat to be able to interview you. Let's start. Go. By telling us what it was like when you showed up in Korea.
Scary.
Okay.
It was cold, and then it got colder and colder and colder. I got there in the 1st of November, something like that. And we lived in Quonset huts, and you get up in the morning and the wash basin with the water in it would be frozen solid. And then the first thing I did was wrote my dad. He said, "Please send me a sweatsuit." And then I wrote him another letter and said, "Please send me another sweatsuit." It was really cold there. And yeah, it was a desolate place. One of the big surprises for me was that all the military reading stuff that I had done was about how you wanted to keep things secret. And somebody picked me up at the airport or wherever, And he was driving a truck that had hobo written on the front. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. And we drove over to the base and we passed a bunch of other trucks that said hobo, H-O-B-O. And I wonder, this isn't much of a secret, is it? And then I found out that the call sign for our wing was hobo. So here we are running around Korea with the sign hobo. So we weren't keeping who we were a secret. And it was really desolate. I got to the 1st of November and it was colder than hell. And it didn't get any warmer for a long time. So that was my introduction to the country. It was very poor, very hilly, dirt roads. And when we got on the base, we had Quonset huts. I don't know if you've ever lived in a Quonset hut in the wintertime, but it's made out of aluminum about that wide, about that thick. So the insulation on it is like that. So if it's 50 outside, it's 51 inside. If it's 30 outside, it's 31 inside. If it's 20 outside, it's 20 inside. Yeah, it was really cold, really cold.
So you started out in Korea flying the F-80, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, the F-80 was the first fighter jet that was in combat, as far as I know. And when I got there, our squadron was made up of F-80s. Later on in the war, we switched over to F-86s. But the F-80 it wasn't very fast, but we didn't have to go very fast. There weren't any MiGs around chasing us. So we could outrun any prop-driven airplane and outmaneuver any MiG. So I thought we were pretty safe, and it turns out we were. It didn't stop flak, though. We got a lot of bullet holes in. And we had one airplane, I think it was 555, that attracted flak like you couldn't believe it. It had patches all over it. All we would do is they'd just cut a hole out where the bullet went through. And then they would take a square piece of aluminum and rivet it on. So we had this one airplane was more patches than it was anything else. But anyway, it was a good airplane. I loved it, and served me well. Then we switched over to F-86s, and flew some MiG alley stuff, not much. Mostly it was air-to-ground stuff. And of the few MiG alley things I flew, they were very boring. You just flew back and forth waiting for someone in the airplane to show up, and none ever did. Well, I saw maybe a couple. But the air-to-ground stuff was more fun because you got to shoot the guns and drop the bombs. And that was more exciting.
When you were in Korea, you were a lieutenant, weren't you?
I was a lieutenant half of my life.
And
yeah, I was a lieutenant for a long time. Over half of my military career, I think.
okay, but as a lieutenant, you were given a lot of responsibility over there during your tour, correct?
Well, I wasn't given it. It was just one of those things where they shot down all the other guys, so I kept moving up. Yeah, I was a operations officer of a fighter squadron in the middle of the war as a lieutenant. And we had a few older guys, majors and stuff like that, who came over. I remember one guy, I was assistant operations officer, and he just came into the squadron as an operations officer. We were down there setting up the schedule for the next day. And he said, I want to show you something, Jim. Pulls out these pictures and says, this is a picture of my wife and my kids. They're really handsome, aren't they? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, so am I. And I don't intend to get any wrinkles over here. I'm going to transfer from the fighter squadron up to wing headquarters where I can sit at a desk. He was gone the next day. We didn't have very many guys like that. there was a time when we had enough pilots where everybody who wanted to go home could go home, especially if you had 60 missions or more. And so we put out the word, you want to go home, you can go home. And nobody volunteered. They all wanted to stay in combat. And it was kind of fun.
What was your total mission count?
I flew 145 combat missions.
Equally,
Now, then we didn't do this time stuff.
equally divided between the F-80 and the F-86, roughly?
I flew about 80 F-80 missions and then about 65 F-86 missions. Yeah.
And you had an in-country checkup?
In the 86, yeah. And the 86 was a one-seater. So the way I got checked out in it was I got some briefings on how to put the gear down and raise it up and the flaps and stuff. And they said, there it is. So I went and checked myself out. Yeah, it was pretty loose over there, but it worked fine. We knew how to fly. And so, yeah, it was a good time.
Well, John recreated the Obstinate Owl 2 for you. And it was a special project. He and I collaborated on that.
Oh.
And tell us a little bit about the airplane and why you chose that airplane.
No, I'm going to tell you why I chose the name.
No.
No, on the whale, you don't want me to tell you that.
I heard that story. You better not. It's something.
When I was on my way to Korea, I had 2 girlfriends. So that's a little awkward to start with. So then I thought I ought to name my airplane after my girlfriends. One of them I called Obstinate, and the other one I called the Owl. So, being a clever guy, I named the airplane the Obstinate Owl. Took care of 2 girlfriends at once. Yeah, that was a fun time. Well, two fun times. One was having 2 girlfriends at the same time, and the other was naming the airplane.
And the tail number had a significant.
Yes, my F-80 was 854. So when the new F-86s came in, I was a senior guy by then, and so I picked an F-86 that had a 458, just in case I couldn't remember it. I wanted to make sure I got in the airplane. Yeah, so my F-80 was 854 and my F-86 was 458.
One other quick question about Korea. K-13, if I'm not mistaken, was the northernmost airfield in Korea.
No,
Oh,
you're wrong already.
Okay.
My God.
Pretty close though, right?
The longest, the airfield closest to the front line was K-14. But it was
Only one off.
Yeah, it was only one off, but it was a few miles apart. And you didn't want land short. So I was fortunate to be at an airfield that was 9,000 feet long. And so when you're flying fighter bombers with bombs on them, you like to have a lot of runway. And one time we had a squadron commander who says, okay, we're going to take off at 3-second intervals. Now, we would fly 48 or 60 airplanes sometimes. And so you got the guys going this way, which is the way the runway goes, and you got these guys coming this way to go around a corner and go out there. And so when you got out there in one of these, on the runway, your nose to tail, alternate like this and like this. And when you release your brakes, we were going to do it at 3-second intervals. So in an F-80, which has a pretty small engine, the guy in front of you releases his brakes, then you release your brakes 3 seconds later. We were about from here to there. We were really close. And one day the squadron commander came out and said, well, I didn't realize it was such a scramble on the runway. Let's go to 4 seconds. And we did. But we really took off as a mob. Yeah.
Were you in Korea until the armistice was signed?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you were all sent home, or did you have to stay there?
I had 145 missions by then. So I went home very quickly. Some of the guys who just got there spent a year there. Well, that was the tour, a year in Korea. And since I'd been there a long time and had a lot of combat missions, and I got to go home pretty quickly. I went to Bangor, Maine. Has anybody here ever been to Bangor, Maine? You poor souls. It was so cold up there. And I'll tell you, my arrival, the center of the town was on the Penobscot River. And so you came into town up here, and you got to this hill and looked over. And there on this side of the building, it said, "The finest talking pictures." Talkies. They were welcoming talkies to town. So that sort of set the stage. Yeah.
You didn't stay there long? Or too long?
I stayed there 13 months, I think. Yeah, it was cold. We didn't have a hangar to put our airplanes in on alert, so we parked them out on a ramp. The first time I got scrambled in December or so, I ran out, put my oxygen mask on, and started taxiing out. I breathed into my oxygen mask. It was so cold, every valve in the mask froze. So I'm taking off with this is like this, I'm trying to breathe. And we never did get a hangar, but we learned how to bring your helmet in, keep it warm inside.
Somewhere along the line, you got a degree in engineering.
Did I?
Right? Yeah, I think you did.
Yeah, I had 2 years of junior college when I joined the Air Force. In those days, you had to have 2 years of college. And then when I wanted to get a degree, so I got sent to University of Michigan. And it was sort of traumatic because I arrived at the beginning of the summer semester. And I took 2 courses in the summer, which was 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And then I took a lot of courses, in the following years. And having been out of school for like 7 or 8 years, and I looked at the math books and stuff, I didn't recognize them. So I taught myself calculus over the weekend. I went down to the library and got a bunch of calculus books and started it Saturday morning when I got out of class. And then I taught myself calculus Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, all Sunday morning night, and got up early Monday morning and finished up, and then went to school. And I was fluent in calculus. Fortunately, I was very good in math, so I got through that. But that was the way it was. You can't go halfway through college and take 7 years off and remember what the hell is going on. So, but that's the way it was. So I got out of Michigan with all A's, so it didn't hurt me too much.
And who did you run into while you were going to school there? Guy became a really good friend, right? Ed?
Well, yeah, Ed White and I, he was a first lieutenant like me, and we had to fly just to keep our flying pay up. And so we had to fly out of the nearest Air Force base, which was Selfridge, which was about 75, 80 miles away. And we used to joke about breakfast at Selfridge, where we'd hop in the airplane and the automobile very early in the morning, drive over to Selfridge, find out the weather's too bad, and then we'd have breakfast, and then we'd come home. Breakfast at Selfridge. Now, but he and I got to be the best of friends, and we flew together on Gemini 4, and he was the pilot on Apollo 1. I was the commander of the backup crew when he got burned up. That was a really sad day, but those things happen. That's why you do flight testing.
So, speaking of flight testing, once you got your degree, you went to Edwards to test pilot school, correct?
Yes, I did.
And after test pilot school, you graduated and you stayed at Edwards for some period of time?
That's a long time ago.
I know, I'm asking a hard question.
Let's see, I graduated from the test pilot school and became a test pilot at Edwards for 3 or 4 years. And then, I don't remember what
At the time, did you know that being a test pilot at Edwards was going to lead to being an astronaut?
I didn't even know that now. No, I had no idea. Being an astronaut was the last thing that ever passed through my mind. I wanted to be a test pilot, and I was, and then an astronaut selection came up, and everybody said, "You're going to do it? You're going to do it?" Why, is it a good deal?
The extra money.
Yeah, the extra money was about that big. As a matter of fact, that was one of the interesting things that happened when I got to be an astronaut. Everybody thought our pay went up. And I went to, invited 2 other guys and I were invited to Congress to talk about astronaut pay. And it was Al Shepard and Deke Slayton and me. And so we got there and they wanted to know what we should be paid. The 3 of us had no idea what they're going to ask us. So we all independently said the same as all the other Air Force officers. And that's the way we were paid. We did at one time, there was a World Book, I think it was, wanted to buy our stories, exclusive stories, which they then gave us a fixed amount of money, lump sum, which we divided up between all the guys. So when we had 16 guys, we got 1/16 of it. Then we had 30 guys, and we got 1/30 of the same number. And then it all pooped out.
That's higher math.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, it was a blessing because I was in the Air Force and I had probably 1 sport coat and a pair of slacks, and all the rest of my clothes were uniforms. And then we got into NASA. We couldn't wear uniforms. We had to be in civilian clothes. So all of a sudden, I get this big, prestigious thing, and I'm utterly broke. I don't have any money for clothes. Yeah, it wasn't as glamorous as it seemed on the outside. But we all managed to get through. I had a father-in-law who ran a clothing store in a lower class part of Cleveland, and he sold black suits to the priest from his parish. So I had a couple of black suits. Yeah, I never looked like a priest, but I had a couple of black suits.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Gemini 4. You take off, you get into space, and a moment comes when you got to open a hatch and throw it up into space.
No, it was an earlier time. When we got into space, we were terrified.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, we had to get out, and we couldn't get the hatch open. And I had worked with I used to work with the technicians a lot. And so I'd worked with these technicians and were having trouble with the hatch off on the side. And so I'd worked with them and I figured out how to get it open and closed, more or less, assuming it didn't break too badly. So when we got ready to open up the hatch, I reached over and went, nothing happened. So I had to figure out how to get the damn hatch open. And we were pressurized in the dark. And Ed was sitting here, I was sitting over here. I'm over here trying to open up his hatch, so finally I thought, well, I think I know how to fix it. So there was a handle with a dog in it that went into another dog when they opened the hatch. So I figured, well, I'll see what I can do. So not knowing if I could ever get it locked up again. Because if you didn't lock it up, you burned up on the way down. Very simple. So anyway, I got over there and I got the thing open. And he got out and did his thing and got back, and I fiddled around with it and got it closed. And then we were supposed to throw out all this garbage that he had, hoses and little chest packs. And he says, we're going to open it now. I says, how dumb do you think I am? You're gonna carry it. So we flew the reentry with all that stuff in his lap. Yeah, it was those were fun times. You know, we were discovering what you could decide in flight and what you could decide on the ground. And sometimes the guys on the ground had more information than you did in flight. And other times the guys in flight had more information. So as far as the hatch went, there wasn't anybody on the ground who knew anything about the hatch. And I thought I was probably the best expert in the world at that moment. So I was. Don't laugh. There weren't very many experts, like there were none. I was the most expert. So anyway, I went ahead and got the hatch open, and we did our thing and got it back closed, and then I could get now remember, I was pressurized. So I'm like this, and I got my blown up finger on my glove into this little hole like that to get this dog put back in place. And I did, so we closed the hatch and we lived.
It's a good thing.
Which was a good idea.
So let's move on to Apollo 9. The very first engineering test flight of the entire lunar landing.
Yeah, right. Both the lunar module and the command and service module. Yeah.
And the lunar spider thing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you couldn't get down from orbit, or you could always get down from orbit, but you burned up on the way in. The lunar module was not designed to re-enter. So when we separated and went on out, we had to get back to the command and service module, which we did, fortunately. Yeah.
And you guys were in space for 10 days, correct?
What is this, a quiz or something?
Yes, it is. So far, you're not doing really well.
Am I going to flunk? Yeah, I guess it was probably 10 days, something like that, yeah. Because we were going up in increments. We went a couple orbits, and then we did 10 days, and then we did 2 weeks, and then those are just the long duration flights. And then we went into orbit or something. Anyway, the doctors insisted that we know what kind of problem we're getting into. So they said, you know, there's a good chance of dying. Oh, really? No shit. So when we deorbited and landed down in the ocean, I opened, and we were floating around, and I said to Ed, "How do you feel?" He says, "I feel okay." I said, "Yeah, so do I. I guess we're not going to die." I mean, that really happened. Yeah.
So on 9, you guys exercised everything.
Yes.
The
Lunar module, command module, service
What was it
module.
like flying that thing?
The whole lunar module?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you stood up in it. And, yeah, you stood up, yeah. And so to keep yourself from floating away, we had a hook on the side of our pressure suit and 2 bungee cords that went to the floor. So you hooked yourself to the floor with the bungee cords on each side, and so you didn't float away. So we did it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys flew around for, what, 150?
300 or 400 years.
No. 150, 200 miles away? From the,
Yeah, we went, as soon as you're more than about 10 feet away, you got to get hooked back up again, you know, because the lunar module was made out of, it was so thin that if you dropped a screwdriver on Earth, on the floor, it would go right through the floor. So we always kept, when we were testing the thing on the ground, we kept a bunch of pads like about that thick on the floor. So in case we dropped something in the spacecraft on the ground, it wouldn't puncture the pressure cell. So anyway, when we got down, we were both alive, which was a good deal.
and joining back up when it was all over and said and done with, created its own set of problems.
The what?
Joining back up with the command module.
Yeah, you know, for those of you who are not experts in orbital mechanics, if you got the
Pay
Earth,
attention, there'll be a test later.
if the Earth is here and you're in orbit around it, the further out you are to stay in orbit, the greater the distance from the center of the Earth. So the pull of gravity is less farther out you go. So if you go way out there, you're going pretty slow because the centrifugal force has to counteract the force of gravity. So as you get lower, you have to go faster to stay in orbit. So to rendezvous, you have to, if there's a guy up here in orbit, the way to rendezvous, you come up behind him. Same plane, you can't change. There's not enough energy in the fuel tanks to change planes. But if you come up behind him and you're catching up with him at a lower altitude, then when you get out in front of him, you accelerate, which causes you to go to a higher orbit. And so if you do it right, you come up like this and you're right there. Piece of cake. Yeah.
So you came down after.
Did I?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're
okay.
here. You're not still up there. The Apollo 9 landing. I think there's a story after the splashdown that maybe most people don't know. If you would share that with us, with the Frogman.
Well, when you land in the spacecraft, this is Apollo, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, Apollo 9.
So we got 3 guys, and we put the life raft out, crawl out and get a life raft, a couple life rafts. And so we're out there floating around, and we got to have the helicopter come over. And in the early days, we recovered with a horse collar. You know, I don't know if you know what I'm, but it was a loop like this that you hold it.
Okay.
Get in it like this. You get in it like that and then turn around. If you get in it wrong and they raised you, you fell out. You got killed. So you had to get in a certain way. And then they decided to go more advanced, and they came up with a thing called a Billy Pew, P-E-W, named after Billy Pew, I guess. And so, and it had an aluminum frame about this big, across here, around like this, and the rest of it was all netting. So it was rigid around the front and across the bottom, made out of aluminum about yay big around. And so when we got around to recovery on my flight, I guess it was, the guy, the squadron, the helicopter pilots that practiced knew what they were doing. But we were landing right next to the carrier. So the squadron commander wanted to do the recovery. He hadn't practiced it at all, didn't know what the hell he was doing at all. So he got out there with this Billy Pew net, swinging back and forth like this, and And one the scuba guys were in the water, and then they got up in the life raft where we had two, I think, two life rafts. And so one of the scuba guys is sitting on the edge of the life raft, and the Billy Punet came, got him right in the back of the neck, which knocked him out. And he fell over backwards out of the life raft. And so he's laying in the water upside down, unconscious, or probably so. We never figured that one out. And so he's drowning over there, and I'm in this other life raft, and I'm doing this, and the helicopter's up here, and you can't hear a damn thing. It's because it's making so much noise. And finally, I jump up and jump over into the other life raft and go over there and try to pull him out of the water because he's upside down under the water. And I couldn't get him bent in the middle. So fortunately, one of the scuba guys realized what was going on. He jumped in the water, bent the guy at the midpoint here. And so once we got him bent, we could pull him up and put him in the... That night I saw him and I said, "How do you feel?" He said, "I really have a terrible headache. But I want to thank you for rescuing me." Yeah. We didn't always do things right. But we made them exciting.
But you're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
One more thing to talk about. After your second space flight, you were promoted to program manager, correct?
Yes.
And you were the program manager during the Apollo 13 emergency.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
No, wait. What happened was there was an oxygen tank, I think, that blew up. And it left the spacecraft without any oxygen and with no way to maneuver. It was really a bad scene. And so finally we were able to get somebody up there myself, and we went over and we got the guys out of there and brought them over here. And then we brought them down. It was a hairy experience because he was up there with no oxygen, or it was just a residual part, and so that was as close as we came to losing anybody in the Apollo program.
So when they managed to get to the point where they were using the limb to provide oxygen
Yes.
to them,
Yeah.
and then you
The-
slingshotted them around the moon.
The
and
service module, we had
it had a big hole in it, correct?
to come in.
Here, I'll hold that if you want.
Yeah, okay. We had the command module up here, the service module here, and then we would take that mess and turn it and go over here and dock nose of the command module into the top of the lunar module. So then we had the lunar module, the command module, and the service module all stacked up like that. The oxygen was in the service module or in the lunar module. There was a small tank in the command module, about this big around with gas. And the other stuff was all liquid oxygen.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. And then they came home and. they
well,
made it.
one of the things that when we were trying to get the command module separated from the service module so they could re-enter, there was this little pile of gaseous oxygen. The rest of the stuff was all liquid. So, and you have 1,000 pounds of liquid oxygen, you got oxygen for a long, long time, days, in fact. But when you get down to gaseous oxygen, it goes in a hurry. So when we got ready to come down, we turned on "Hey, how you doing up there, buddy?" Yeah, we had to make sure we were managing this stuff the right way. And so when we were having these oxygen problems, the thing we had to do was go to the lunar module and use that liquid oxygen. And then when we got ready to come down, we didn't have any liquid oxygen in the command and service module. We just had this little bottle of gas oxygen. So that's when we got ready to bring them home. We had him run over and turn on the gaseous oxygen, dump the service lines, and come home on his little tank again.
And you stayed the program manager through which Apollo mission?
What is this, a quiz?
It is a quiz. You're doing okay so far.
Well, I think I was the program manager all the way through the end of the program. Or maybe not. Maybe I left and turned one over to one of the other guys. But I did Apollo 14 or something all the way back through 10, I guess it was. I did 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Anyway, but we did a bunch of them.
And your flying buddies on 9, they eventually flew on later missions, both of them, right?
Yeah, well, I only had one guy. Well, let's see. Ed White flew again, and then he got burned up in that fire, so that was a bad deal.
Dave,
That was really a bad deal because Ed and I were really close together. We went to University of Michigan. He was getting a master's degree, and I was getting a bachelor's degree. But since he didn't have an aero engineering, he and I were in the same classes most of the time. My bachelor's degree helped him get his master's. Yeah, we were pretty close together, and then we were having a lot of problems on Apollo 1 or whatever number it was, and he finally got caught up in that fire. When the fire happened, there wasn't any way for these guys to get out. We were in a 100% oxygen environment. I could burn up that camera right there with the mic in that kind of environment. It was really dangerous. And it wasn't until after we burned those guys up that we really realized how bad it was. Because everything we had in a command module was flammable in one way or another. And I could burn that stand right there in 100% oxygen. I mean, anything will burn like that. You just have to heat it up. So living in an environment of 100% oxygen was a bad idea. And we didn't do it anymore after that. We went to, you had to pre-bathe before you went up in space. It's like a diver who's down in the water and comes back out, and he's got to make sure that the nitrogen in his bloodstream is gone because the bubbles will expand, and he'll get something called the bends, because these nitrogen bubbles expand and they get in your joints, and it hurts like hell. I've had that, but not that way. I mean, I was doing it sort of to find out what it was like. Well, we did that stuff. We'd go into an altitude chamber and take off your mask, and then as you started to pass out, you knew what it felt like to pass out. And so then you'd put your mask back on and you'd be okay. There'd be a safety monitor there with you. But if you didn't experience that stuff on the ground in a test, and you happen to be in space, you just die. I mean, you wouldn't know what it was. These things are very insidious. And so if you started passing out, you had to know why and what to do and stuff. So we did all of it. It was really fun.
In all seriousness, it turned out to be a great life, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Jim?
And there's the proof of it right there, my wife.
Yeah.
And next to her is my daughter. They're the two good-looking ones in our family. Except for my other daughters.
I don't know how to thank you. This has been the opportunity of a lifetime for me, but this has really been great.
Before we go, does anybody have a question that I could answer for you that's been bugging you? Okay. Oh, damn. You screwed up the ending. Go ahead. What? Go ahead. Get over here where I can hear you. Get up here where I can hear you. Yeah.
Sir, what kind of advice would you give my generation?
Don't. No, there's no advice for a generation. This stuff happens one on one. You know, my generation didn't go into space. I did. You follow me? And if you don't want to do that, then don't do it. Don't do something else. And so, of all the guys I was associated with in the Air Force, only a few of us went up in space. And maybe some of them shouldn't have. Well, we had a process where we were asked to evaluate the other guys on our astronaut group. And I was pretty realistic. You know, there were some guys that probably shouldn't have been there. And so they killed themselves. And then there were other guys who should have been there and they didn't kill themselves. So, yeah, this was not a walk in the park. And there was a lot of testing that you're doing, and it was all pretty dangerous stuff. Any questions out here? Judy asked me a question. What are we going to have for dinner?
Well, sir, I can tell you that there's that old quote, we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Wait a second. Say that again.
There's that old quote,
Yeah.
we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm able to look one-on-one and
Well, if you stood on my shoulder, I wouldn't look I'd be on the floor.
I'd never do that to you, sir, but you're still an inspiration.
He was going to make a really good speech, and I screwed it up.
You win.
Is there any question out there before I go? Yeah.
While you were in your Apollo mission, did you have time to appreciate the significance of what you were doing at the time?
No, we didn't give a crap about that stuff. No, we were busy, and the same. All the space flights are the same. You go up, hopefully you don't blow up, then you're up there for a while, and then you come down, and hopefully you don't burn up. So it's pretty straightforward. So I mean, what? Yeah, right. That's all it was. Because it wasn't like we took you and put you in a spacecraft. You'd have wet your pants. But I would mine too. No, we used to have when we were doing a lot of centrifuge work, we had a urine collection device, UCD, where you put your tallywhacker in this thing, and it looks like a condom, and then there's a bag there. And so, for those of you girls, I'll close your eyes. But when you get cold, your tallywhacker shrinks. So you'd put your big tallywhacker in this thing. Then you'd get cold and it would shrink, and then you'd pee all over yourself because we used to call it the wetback club. My wife is giving me a dirty look right now.
And I think that's your message to my generation. Thank you, sir.
What?
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you
Really
for the message to my generation.
Hey, we have one more question from Bill Pitts back there.
Oh yeah. What? Go ahead, Bill.
Would you tell us the
He
story?
wants to know how I got promoted to lieutenant colonel. And quite frankly, I can't remember. How did I? Refresh my memory.
Remember the president gave you the first?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah. That president. Yeah, I got promoted by the president. It was sort of a spot promotion. Yeah, but you know, in those days, being an astronaut didn't bring me any more money. I was an Air Force captain, so I get the captain's pay. And then I went up to Deke Slayton and Al Sharper and I were called up to Washington to meet with the congressman. And they wanted to know what we should be paid. And I was a captain. Those two guys were either majors or captains. And so we said, well, we think we ought to be paid the same as all the other guys in the military. If we're a captain, we should get paid like a captain. And we didn't rehearse this stuff. They just popped this question out, and we all three answered the same way. And so, having got selected as an astronaut, and we were not allowed to wear military uniforms because this is a civilian program. And so, it was a little awkward because none of us had any money and none of us had any civilian clothes, but we couldn't wear our military uniforms. So we were a ragged-looking bunch of public servants.
Jim, thanks so much. I really do appreciate it.